The crown has not just shifted, it has been violently ripped from the throne, sending shockwaves through the entire foundation of women's basketball. What was supposed to be a graceful coronation for A'ja Wilson's legendary reign has erupted into an absolute, unmitigated crisis. The WNBA is currently standing in the center of a catastrophic power struggle, where old-school dominance is colliding head-on with an unstoppable, culture-shifting phenomenon. Caitlin Clark hasn't just entered the MVP conversation. She has completely seized control of it, shattering ratings, obliterating all-time records, and forcing the Indiana Fever past the crumbling Las Vegas Aces in a stunning, high-stakes standings takeover. The sheer velocity of Clark's rise has unleashed an unprecedented storm of jealousy, panic, and toxic locker-room tension that threatens to tear the league apart. Fans are screaming, veteran players are quietly panicking, and the media ecosystem is burning down under the weight of this brutal rivalry. A'ja Wilson's empire is suddenly bleeding ground, while Clark's unstoppable momentum surges like a tidal wave, destroying everything in its path. Every single game is no longer just a matchup. It is an explosive, high-stakes war for the ultimate legacy, and the fallout is far worse than anyone ever dared to imagine. To fully comprehend the seismic explosion tearing through the sport today, you have to look back at the simmering, toxic history built over years of bitter resentment and unyielding pride. A'ja Wilson didn't just build the WNBA's modern standard, she bled for it, forged it in blood and sweat, and established an ironclad dynasty with the Las Vegas Aces that felt utterly invincible. 4 seasons, Wilson stood as the untouched, undisputed goddess of women's basketball, collecting championships, defensive player honors, and MVP trophies with a terrifying level of ease. She was the gold standard, the untouchable titan whose throne was built on total physical dominance and years of quiet, underappreciated labor. But beneath that glorious surface, a deeply personal obsession was brewing, an intense desire to be universally recognized as the undisputed face of the league forever. Then came the earthquake known as Caitlin Clark. From the moment Clark stepped into the professional ranks, surrounded by an unprecedented wall of media hype, record-breaking broadcast deals, and screaming packed arenas, the psychological landscape of the league fractured overnight. While Wilson had spent nearly a decade earning every single inch of her kingdom through relentless grind, Clark arrived like an unstoppable meteor, instantly commanding every television camera, every headlining debate, and every corporate endorsement in existence. The emotional toll behind the scenes was immediate, dark, and suffocating. Whispers began circulating through executive corridors and dark locker-room hallways about deep-seated resentment brewing within the old guard. Veterans who had fought for pocket change in empty arenas felt utterly erased by the glowing spotlight cast solely on the rookie sensation. Every single possession between Indiana and Las Vegas quietly transformed into a psychological battleground, loaded with unspoken hatred, pride, and suffocating tension. Wilson carried the immense emotional weight of defending the old guard's honor, determined to prove that pure basketball royalty could never be overshadowed by a flash-in-the-pan sensation. She posted legendary, unheard-of individual statistics night after night, desperately attempting to keep her empire alive under the suffocating weight of Clark's skyrocketing cultural footprint. Yet, despite putting up numbers that would historically guarantee a unanimous MVP trophy, Wilson could feel the ground beneath her feet violently slipping away. The constant, deafening roar of the crowd was no longer chanting her name. It was screaming for the girl wearing number 20 in Indiana. The emotional dam was cracking, the pressure inside both locker rooms was reaching a deadly boiling point, and the stage was quietly being set for an explosive, catastrophic collision that would forever split the sport in two. The inevitable collision finally erupted into pure, unadulterated chaos when the Indiana Fever did the unthinkable, storming past the Las Vegas Aces in the standings to snatch the number 3 seed at an astonishing 24-12 record. The basketball universe stood completely frozen in horror as A'ja Wilson's empire collapsed in real time. Clark didn't just win games, she put up an offensive masterclass, averaging 22 points, 8 assists, and 4 rebounds, while orchestrating a mind-bending 40.5 points per game for Indiana through her scoring and playmaking combined. Over a brutal 12-game stretch, Clark generated a staggering 46 points per game, dropping 313 points and 110 assists, creating a statistical canyon that made even the most hardened critics gasp for air. Wilson fought back like a wounded lioness, pouring in 319 points and 114 rebounds of her own, but the Aces were spiraling out of control, losing crucial games while Indiana refused to drop a single contest. Then came the first catastrophic twist that turned this fierce basketball rivalry into a sinister, full-blown political conspiracy. Leaked internal communications and whispers from inside the league's inner circle began pointing to a massive, hidden power struggle happening behind closed doors. Anonymous league officials and high-profile commentators began whispering that the MVP voting panel was facing unprecedented, dark political pressure from corporate executives and network brass. The ratings were exploding whenever Clark played. A mind-boggling 1.62 million viewers tuned in for her matchups, peaking at 2.2 million, making it the most-watched game in network history, while games in Toronto had to be violently relocated to massive 20,000-seat NHL arenas just to accommodate the hysterical, screaming crowds. The cold, hard financial reality hit the league office like a freight train. Caitlin Clark was generating hundreds of millions of dollars for the WNBA, while the traditional narrative surrounding Wilson was failing to move the economic needle. The first shocking reveal shattered the illusion of a fair race. Internal voter tracking leaked, exposing that several high-ranking MVP electors had secretly abandoned Wilson altogether, switching their top-line votes to Clark not just because of her superior team winning record, but due to immense corporate pressure to crown the global face of the sport. When the news trickled down into the Las Vegas locker room, the emotional explosion was catastrophic. Wilson reportedly confronted team officials in a state of absolute fury, feeling completely betrayed by a system she had bled for over nearly a decade. The illusion of meritocracy had dissolved into a brutal game of corporate chess, leaving the locker rooms poisoned with paranoia, hostility, and a terrifying sense of imminent war. The psychological warfare reached an absolute boiling point as the standings shift caused an explosive chain reaction across the entire league. Las Vegas was completely imploding. In a desperate attempt to regain control of her locker room and salvage her historic season, A'ja Wilson reportedly demanded a high-stakes, emergency player-only meeting behind locked doors. Insiders described the atmosphere inside that meeting as toxic, cold, and suffocating with tension. Teammates who were used to winning back-to-back championships were suddenly turning on one another, pointing fingers as the Las Vegas defense collapsed down the stretch. Wilson, feeling the crushing emotional weight of her fading throne, publicly called out the team's lack of urgency. But the underlying panic was undeniable. She was watching her entire legacy get eclipsed in real time by a rookie phenom who refused to back down. Meanwhile, in Indiana, the temperature was rising to a dangerous, uncontrolled extreme. Every single game Caitlin Clark played was treated like an international spectacle, but behind the roaring crowds and historic TV broadcasts, the physical toll was getting terrifying. Opposing defenses began targeting Clark with brutal, borderline violent physicality on the floor, trying to break her rhythm and crush her spirit before she could officially seal the MVP award. Screen after screen turned into bone-crushing collisions, and subtle cheap shots off the ball became a nightly routine as veteran players desperately rallied to protect the old hierarchy. Then came the second major, earth-shattering twist that sent shockwaves through the front offices of the WNBA. Just as the MVP narrative was solidifying around Clark's unstoppable momentum, an explosive leak exposed secret contractual clauses tied directly to league-wide television rights and global marketing bonuses. It was revealed that key network executives and major sponsors had written massive financial incentives directly contingent on Caitlin Clark securing top-tier postseason honors, including the league MVP trophy. The revelation sent shockwaves through the players' union, unleashing an immediate wave of anger, jealousy, and accusations of institutional corruption. A'ja Wilson and her camp realized they weren't just fighting an elite basketball player on the court, they were fighting an all-powerful corporate machine that had rigged the entire narrative ecosystem against them from day one. The psychological damage was done. The rivalry was no longer just about basketball, but an all-out war for the very soul and financial future of the WNBA. The exposure of those secret corporate clauses unleashed an atomic bomb across the entire sports landscape, plunging the WNBA into an unprecedented public nightmare. Social media completely incinerated within minutes, fracturing the fanbase into two intensely hostile, warring camps. Millions of furious fans flooded every digital platform, unleashing a relentless barrage of vitriol, conspiracy theories, and toxic accusations. A'ja Wilson's fiercely loyal supporters organized massive online boycotts, screaming that the league had openly sold its soul, betrayed its most decorated black superstar, and rigged the entire voting architecture to favor a media darling. Simultaneously, Caitlin Clark's army of fans fought back with vicious intensity, weaponizing her staggering statistical output, her historic ratings, and the indisputable reality that the Indiana Fever had physically dragged themselves past the Aces in the standings. The emotional fallout inside the league's inner circle was absolute poison. National sports television shows erupted into volatile, screaming, shouting matches every single morning, as legendary analysts and former players openly questioned the legitimacy of the entire MVP award. The psychological pressure resting on both superstars grew so suffocating that it began spilling over into public view. During post-game press conferences, the tension in the room was cold enough to freeze blood. When questioned about the changing standings and the shifting MVP narrative, a visibly exhausted A'ja Wilson gave icy, sharp, short answers, her eyes burning with a heartbreaking combination of profound betrayal and intense, quiet rage. She was suffering under the unbearable weight of feeling erased by the very institution she had built on her back. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark was forced to navigate a terrifying psychological war zone of her own. Despite putting up numbers that defied historical logic, Clark found herself completely isolated, standing at the eye of a massive, swirling hurricane of public hatred and corporate obsession. Off the court, she was forced to double her security detail as death threats, hyper-intense media stalking, and overwhelming fan hysteria reached dangerous, uncontrolled levels. Inside opposing arenas, hostile crowds booed her every touch, transforming every road game into a brutal, unforgiving gauntlet of emotional abuse. Teammates whispered that Clark was quietly carrying the immense, crushing weight of the entire league's financial future on her young shoulders, constantly forced to act like a bulletproof shield while facing subtle cold shoulders from peers who deeply resented her overnight godlike status. The joy of playing basketball had completely vanished, replaced by an agonizing, high-stakes battle for survival where every pass, every shot, and every missed bucket was ruthlessly dissected by millions of hypercritical eyes searching for any sign of weakness. Just as the public fallout reached a deafening crescendo and the regular season ticked down to its final, agonizing hours, an unreleased internal leak from the WNBA Board of Governors dropped a final nuclear shockwave through the sport. Deep within the high-security voting portal, where elite media members submitted their final, sealed ballots, an unprecedented technical crisis occurred. A controversial voting split had officially resulted in the single closest, most wildly contested ballot differential in professional basketball history. But the terrifying reveal went far deeper than a simple statistical tie. High-level whistleblowers privately leaked that due to the massive corporate integrity scandals, multiple veteran voters had secretly submitted blank or corrupted ballots in protest against league executive influence, threatening to render the entire 2026 MVP outcome completely invalid and legally void. As news of the potential voting disaster began leaking into team channels, the Indiana Fever and Las Vegas Aces walked out onto the hardwood for their final, defining games under cloud of absolute paranoia. Standing near the tunnel, A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark exchanged a chilling, silent gaze across the floor. A icy moment frozen in time that encapsulated months of bitter psychological warfare, corporate corruption, broken friendships, and unbridled ambition. With the entire sports world holding its breath and millions of fans screaming in packed arenas, the league office abruptly issued a dark, emergency directive delaying the official MVP announcement indefinitely. The throne remained completely vacant, surrounded by chaos, legal threats, and fractured trust. The ultimate question hung suspended over the entire basketball universe like a razor-sharp blade. Had Caitlin Clark's historic rise officially crowned her as the undisputed savior of the sport, or had the toxic, high-stakes battle for the MVP trophy permanently destroyed the very league she was meant to reign over? The WNBA is currently teetering on the edge of complete chaos, and the battle between Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson has permanently reshaped the entire history of women's basketball. This isn't just about an MVP trophy anymore. It's an all-out war over legacy, respect, corporate power, and the ultimate crown. Now, the big question falls on you. Was Caitlin Clark's record-shattering takeover and team success enough to earn her the top spot, or was A'ja Wilson robbed of her legendary throne by media hype and corporate pressure? Drop your raw, unfiltered thoughts in the comments below. Smash that like button, and subscribe right now to stay tuned as this terrifying scandal continues to unfold.